Welcome to the Liberty Show. I am Auntie Oligarchy, and we have Ron Sinkush with us today, and we are going to start things off actually by talking a little bit about something that's a hot topic currently with Starbucks, and we thought we'd do our own little version of their questionnaire and race relations.
Yeah, apparently, I don't go to Starbucks, but apparently they were releasing a questionnaire about race, and I guess have since stopped releasing this. Yes. Is that correct? But it caused a bit of an uproar in the news, right? So first of all, I'd like to go on the record and say that as a private corporation, Starbucks has the right to give out a questionnaire of anything they like, and I don't think we should use the force of the government to stop them from doing that. That being said, like anything, that doesn't mean that what they did was good or that we endorse it in any way, shape, or form either. So apparently, here's some of the questions that are on it. It says, where do you stand? Use these conversation starters with your family and friends. Number one is, my parents had blank friends of a different race. I don't know if they're looking for numbers there or a quantitative description like strange friends of a different race, or
doesn't really give you an option.
My parents had 17 friends of a different. I'm not sure what they were going for there. One way or the other, it's a little bit ambiguous. And then the next one is, I have blank friends of a different race. Again, I don't know if you're looking for numbers or descriptors there. Kind of sounds like Match Game 79 a little bit, doesn't it? You remember that? How many friends did you have? I had so many blank friends. Anyway, let's just stop right there before I get in trouble. So what we came up with was, if we had our own libertarian Starbucks and we were going to ask questions, they would be slanted a little bit differently, right?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So here's our list and how we'd go about it. Number one, when the housing bubble, which was caused by government intervention in the housing market, burst, the value of my parents' house decreased along with the houses of different racial backgrounds. True or false? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be true.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that one was across the board.
I think it did, yeah. So let's go on to number two. The NSA illegally spies on my race and other races. True or false?
Yeah, that's a case where the NSA, they don't discriminate. We're all in that one.
I think they're getting everybody.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a pattern forming here. Number three, when the private Federal Reserve creates currency out of nothing to pay for the overspending of Congress, it affects the purchasing power of my race and other races. True or false? Could it be another true?
I think so.
Yeah, we could go through the whole list. I think I'm gonna sort of sum it up here with the general sentiment. Folks, it's not about your race. This is another dividing line that these guys are using to get us to argue with each other. It's not just race. It's sexual orientation.
Definitely.
It's economic status. It's religion. It's any possible way you can define yourself as a human being, or any group you can throw yourself into, athlete, non-athlete, whatever the case may be. They want us to argue with each other over these topics so that they increase their power, influence, and control over your life.
Well, and it's also interesting to note that this is all engineered, most definitely, to keep us arguing. There was a very small, very old interview that I found. It was a 60 Minutes interview from a long time ago that had Mike Wallace interviewing Morgan Freeman, and they were discussing Black History Month, and at this time Morgan Freeman responded that he didn't care for that. He didn't want it, and Morgan Freeman asked Mike Wallace, where's White History Month? And Mike Wallace replied, well, I'm Jewish. And then Morgan says, well, hey, where's Jewish History Month? And basically, to sum up that little bit, he ended the whole thing by saying, it's ridiculous. The more we talk about race and our differences, the worse it is. It's, hi, my name is That's Morgan Freeman. We have first names. And I think that is much more important than this other thing. Another point that I like to make is that when we're so divided about somebody's skin color or sexual orientation or whatnot, meanwhile, while we're all riled up about that, they're upping the ante on these laws about spying and government takeover of our liberties, basically, are being trashed. And many people don't even realize it because we're too busy fighting about, which baker's gonna, make the cake for the gay wedding.
Yeah. Meanwhile, while you attack the other side, right?
Yeah.
They're running rampant with total control and their plans to completely put us all down and control every aspect of our lives. And so we wanted to use that as a bit of a segue into another issue that's a really hot topic right now. In Indiana, Governor Pence just signed the RFRA into law, which is an extremely controversial bill. It's got Facebook ablaze, right, written about it. And so really, if you're wondering what the libertarian stance on this particular issue is, you have to go back to understand the genesis of this bill. I guess it's very complex, and I've been trying to do some homework on this bill and how long it's been around and what the history is behind it. And there's a lot to uncover. But in a nutshell, laws like this are attempts to circumvent or to shut down other bad law that was written in previous attempts, right? So why did we ever have any laws that told property owners who they could or could not associate with? Freedom of association, the ability to pick your friends and the people that you want to be around on your property is something that is a primary right, a primary property right.
I believe it's in the Constitution.
Yeah, and so why did we ever have to quantify this or put restrictions about religions about it? Is this to insinuate that if you don't have a religion, you don't have freedom of association? I mean, do you have to join a group to get rights? Rights belong to individuals, not groups, right? If you have to join a group to get a right, what are we saying? We're saying you're nothing alone? You don't have any rights as a human being? Now, does that mean you should have the right to discriminate? I mean, or that the Libertarian Party is putting our approval on discrimination? Absolutely not. We believe that a free market dictates that if you have any good ideas about how to succeed in business and you want to grow a business, you sell to anybody who has something that they can trade to you for your goods or services. If you start limiting who you sell to, you start limiting your ability to profit. And the overriding lesson in a free market is that there shouldn't be any discrimination at all because everybody's dollar spends the same, right? And that's what libertarians have stood for all along. So certainly not. Now, but you can't, in a nutshell here, folks, here's the problem. You can't use the force of government to fix every little thing, every little or big thing that happens in the world. And you certainly can't use it to change the heart and minds of haters, right? Because all you're going to do is foster and create more of that hate. So while we certainly could improve race relations, while we certainly could improve all of our relationships with our neighbors, and we could learn how to get along in peace, and as important as that is, as much as we need to talk about it, if you're going to use the heavy hand or the hammer of government to try to do your fix, you're not going to get any meaningful fix. At the very least, you're going to run it underground or hide it from the surface, but you're never going to get to the root of the problem.
Well, and let's not forget something painfully obvious, that there will always be some faction of people that are haters. There will always be. You will never be able to fix everybody the way, we all think about, sitting around a campfire singing Kumbaya. Okay, it's not going to happen for everyone. And in reality, it would be a very boring place if it was.
Maybe peaceful, but
It
boring.
could be. It would be boring. It would be peaceful, but
That's right.
perhaps boring. I don't know. But the thing is that, again, you don't force somebody into your religion or your way of thinking, your philosophy, by instituting government to say, no, you have to associate with that person. You have to sell your baked goods to that group of people. You must do this or you are breaking the law.
Yeah.
That is not freedom at all.
So the Libertarian Party, I think, probably looks forward to peaceful coexistence and finding a way to get along and improving relations of all people, whether it be via race, economic background, sexual preference, gender, any possible
People.
line you want to draw, right?
Yeah.
We all need to find a way to coexist. And in fact, I think that's kind of really one of the gists of libertarianism. It really it understands that people are individuals and they're going to have thoughts of their own, right? And so libertarianism is kind of the least common denominator that we need to coexist, right? Because if you have to use the force of government to dictate what you want onto other people, you're never going to achieve a peace, a true and lasting peace. And so we are a party of peace, and the methods matter. It's not just the end goal. The methods are important as well.
I agree. And with that, I think we are going to take a break and we'll be right back.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Today with me is Daniel McAdams, who is the co-host, and he's also the executive director of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Good to have you here today, Daniel.
Good morning, sir.
Good. Well, the world is still filled with a lot of problems. It looks like our efforts haven't been successful yet. The troops aren't home yet, and the wars are still going on, and there's potential hot spots in Ukraine all the way down to Yemen into Africa, and we're involved in all of those. But also the economy, although the stock market is booming, we still have some big problems in the economy. But guess what is the big issue today that we're going to address? Is who has the authority to tell a bakery how and when and what they can put on a cake. Now, don't you think that's a pretty important subject that we need to deal with?
It seems critical.
It is. Matter of fact, I think most people know about what's going on because it's been in the news, and it has to do with this problem of a law passed in Indiana, which is a consequence of a problem in Oregon. There was a couple that refused to bake a cake in a special way for a homosexual couple. And they ended up going out of business, so that was one consequence. But the whole thing is there has been a move on for allowing people to express their religious beliefs and not be punished. For instance, this couple in Oregon that refused to bake a cake in a certain manner by their Department of Labor, they are now pressured under their law because they have violated somebody's rights or demands. I don't call it a right. It's a demand, and they didn't do it. They can be fined $75,000 per person and given money to those customers. So here it is. They are arguing the case that the customer has a right to demand, and if you don't do what they want, they can close you down and fine you, and you have to reimburse them. I don't consider that an example of an individual right.
That sounds pretty crazy, but what's the Indiana solution? Does it make any more sense?
Well, it's complex. I think it comes from too many laws of political correctness and how do you enforce them. But if one questions on whether this makes any sense, let me just read a short portion of the Indiana law that's supposed to solve all this mess. And we've been around a bit and read a lot of legislation, and a lot of it's a mess, and you can't ever read the truth. But this is a pretty good example of this. So the Indiana law says, and this is supposed to solve this problem, a governmental entity may substantially burden a person person's exercise of religion only if the government entity demonstrates that application of the burden to the person is the furtherance of a compelling government interest and is the least restrictive means of furthering the compelling interest of the government.
So in regular English, that means you can't discriminate against someone's religion unless the government decides it's good for the government to discriminate against someone's religion. Is that
Yeah,
right?
That's what they think they can do, and of course that's why there's a lot of unhappiness. But I compare it a little bit to the skirmishes that go on with legislation on marriage. You and I may have a definition of marriage, and maybe they can make the case that we don't have the right to tell everybody our definition has to be followed. If somebody else wants to define marriage a certain way, and libertarians say, well, that's okay. But the whole problem is changing the law. Why does the law have to tell us what to do and what the definition is? And this is, in a way, political correctness, and it's put into law. I used to think political correctness was not legal, that it was just a political opinion. Pressure was put on individuals to obey the line of political correctness, and they can do a great deal of harm. But in this case, this is legislating. The way it happened in Oregon. This is legislating political correctness. If you don't do it, you can be in big trouble. So I understand our friend Chris Rossini has made a comment on this, and it's interesting his take on this.
Yeah, Chris wrote on the Target Liberty website that he pointed out that this business Angie's List has announced in response to the Indiana law that it will now pull out of its plan to build a $40 million headquarters in Indiana. And what Chris points out is very interesting is that they don't like the fact that the intent of the Indiana legislation is to allow people to exercise their free choice of who they do business with. But isn't Angie's List doing the same thing by saying it refuses to do business in Indiana? So they're exercising the same freedoms that they don't believe other people should have in Indiana.
And they're leaving. They're going to another state, which is one of the solutions that we advocate. I also understand that there might be some money involved with Angie's List, the state money, and they weren't going to get as much government money, and they were getting on their way out anyway, and that this was sort of, being used as an excuse. But, it really goes back to some basic principles. Can we solve all our problems by law? Write a law and says you have to do this. We can tell you if somebody wants a cake a certain way, it is their right, and we can insist on it, and if not, we're going to punish you for this. But in a society that recognizes liberty and private property, all associations would be voluntary. And some of the people who are condemning this law love voluntary associations. Just when you think of the laws that were written that were very discriminatory, against race and for sexual matters, these laws were bad and we had to eliminate them. But then they turn around and they use the government to have what I think is affirmative action. You will do this, your association, you will be forced to do this. You say, well, this is public, this is not private, but if you and I own a restaurant and we want to have a certain clientele and we want to have a certain decorum, and we say, well, we don't want 10 kids with you running around in the room, and we don't want you to come in sandals and you have to wear a shirt. And nobody questions that. So there are times when we already are making these type of choices.
What do you think about the approach of Indiana where they use your religious beliefs as a substitute for what you're saying, which is property rights?
Well, I think that confuses things very much because it to me isn't a religious issue. It's a rights issue because I think it's been pointed out also that secular people, non-religious people, have their druthers and their desires. Do they have as much rights as the people who have religious reasons? That's why I think the answer to so many of these problems can't be found in, say, religiosity, religious beliefs, because the government's role in religion is keep your hands off, but not to use it, and then you get it confused because then they end up not defending this basic principle of voluntary voluntary associations. That is, to me, so important. And I think we do pretty well on voluntary associations, in sexual matters, in religious matters, and other things. But when it comes to economics, it is bad. Now, one person pointed out that maybe this would lead to something bad on religious matter. What if this was carried to a full extent of it? Could it be that government might use this to say, well, priests and ministers use the state to sign the law because this is a legal matter, and therefore you will marry the people we tell you to? Would that be a logical conclusion to this?
And they receive their certification by the state as ministers. So what happens to very conservative ministers who their biblical beliefs prevent them from doing this? Talk about opening a can of worms.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there are so many things that could be solved with voluntary approach. No force by one group over another. Boycotts and leave, go from one state to another, and you can correct a lot of these problems. But bothers me most when they claim it's a right. A demand. Okay, I have a right to this. I'm entitled to this. And they never say, well, how about the other person? Does he give up his right to just, have his property confiscated and given to somebody else? So they do this. They so often call things rights that aren't right. We have a right to our life. We have a right to our liberty, and we have a right to pursue our happiness, and that should be protected. If the government would only do that, believe me, we would be a much happier society. But for us as a culture, when all the important things are going on around the world today, are spending this much time on what are the rules and regulations on baking a cake? It's pretty absurd. So I think that there is an easy solution, and that is just believing in liberty and believing that people can make choices and people can boycott and they can walk out and have a definition of rights a lot more precise than they are today.
Yeah.
That communism and fascism, the so-called opposites, are merely variants of collectivism. They're the same thing. And they believe that the group is more important than the individual, for example, and the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. They believe that the state should be all-powerful and that the people should obey the state for the greater good of the greater number and all of that sort of thing. They believe that rights are granted by the state. They're not part of the human being. They're not God-given. They're not entrenched in his body and soul. They have to be granted by the state. All of these things, and you look at them one by one, communists and fascists and Nazis and socialists, they all believe that. So wherein lies the conflict, you see? And I began to question that. And I realized that it's partly a trick. In fact, I think it's a huge trick. It's a great scam because people even today are thinking that they have to choose between the right or the left, not realizing that no matter which way they go, they've accepted basically the same ideology underneath. Now, it's true that the leaders of these groups, like the Stalins of the world and the Adolf Hitlers of the world and the Mao Zedongs of the world and so forth, the leaders of these groups on left and right will fight each other. And they will go to war with each other. And there will be tremendous battles, as we saw in World War II, for example. But what are they fighting over? Ideology? Not at all, because they agree on ideology. What they're fighting over is dominance. Who is going to rule? That's all they're fighting over. And once you get that picture historically, it's not too difficult to see that that's the same thing going on even today, as certainly going on in American politics. We have the left versus the right, sort of embodied today in the Republican Party supposedly on the right and the Democrat Party supposedly on the left. Now here's a choice, isn't there? Well, why is it if this is such a choice and we go from Republicans to Democrats and then 4 years or 8 years later we go back to Republicans again and we keep doing this? We've been doing this since World War I. How come the country keeps moving in the same direction all the time, deeper and deeper and deeper into collectivism? Regardless of which party is in in favor because they both believe in collectivism. They both believe in big government. Their slogans are different, their leaders are different, but the poor voter out there trying to make sense of all this is, he's tricked, he's stuck, he's trapped. And so this is the important thing to, I think, understand, that this left-right paradigm is it's a political ploy. It works very well for those who know what they're doing. We find that the Republican Party and the Democrat Party both are pretty much in the hands of a relatively small group of people with a membership of about 4,000. It's called the Council on Foreign Relations. These are the people that are really pulling the strings in both the Republican and the Democrat Party. And they've even written about it. There's a fellow by the name of Carroll Quigley, who's a former history professor at Georgetown University. By the way, he was the mentor of William Clinton when Clinton was a student there. And he wrote several books about this group of people and their origins and their roots coming from Europe and England in particular. And he comes to a very interesting point in one of his books where he says, okay, this is the way the real world is. He said, how is it that we collectivists, we elitists, how can we rule the world when at the same time we want to let the average person think that they're living in a, quote, democracy. They're living in a system where their vote counts. They're living in this world in which they feel that they must participate in their own political destiny. This is a carefully nurtured myth that they want to create, so people will be content with no matter what happens to them, they'll say, well, I voted for it, or I did it. This government is my government. No matter how bad it is, it's responsible to me. And as long as people have that image, then they don't complain so much about how bad it gets because they did it, they think. So Quigley deals with this question, how do you let people think that they're directing their own political destiny when at the same time we, the elite, we are the ones who must direct their political destiny without them knowing it? How do you do that? And he answers the question brilliantly. He said, it's very simple. You've got to have two major political parties, and they'll both have the same major goals, the same basic fundamental principles, and they'll argue with each other on the surface with slogans and leadership and style and all of that sort of thing. He said, but we will control them both. There's the strategy. There's the whole scam behind this left-right paradigm. When you understand this history and this reality, you look at it and you say, well, yes, we've got a left wing and a right wing, but they're just opposite wings of the same ugly bird. And that bird is called collectivism.
All right, we're back. Thanks for watching. And if you would like to get some more information, Ron here can tell you more about where to go.
Yep, you can find out more information, lpin.org and lp.org. That's the Indiana Libertarian Party website and the National Party website. We're also on Facebook at Northern Indiana Libertarians and St. Joe County Libertarians. So we'd love to have you out for a meeting. Bring a friend or two. And until next time, or we'll see you then.